Coogs house. I guess you could say we are still open for business. This is not the time to press pause. He said the thing.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs Daily Podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Make sure you're making us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. If you want to join the conversation but don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below. Well, okay, since Big 12 Media Days were in Vegas, if you're in Vegas and playing games or whatever, do you put it all on red or do you put it all on black? Tell us in the comments down below to join the conversation. Today's episode is all about some things Brett Yormark had to say and what the extrapolation has very quickly become from those at Big 12 Media Day. I want to talk some about the bigger, broader things. I want to tie all these things to Houston. But the big thing that he said that we have to tackle here is that Yormark said that the Big 12 and thus Houston are still open for business. Now, everyone asked questions about realignment and stuff like that. Continue to expand the Big 12. Direct questions even asked about with the ACC and their legal troubles and lawsuits and how that would impact things. All of those different questions were kind of ducked and dodged. But I will say that a Dellenger article came out on Wednesday to follow up Big 12 Media Day, and it ties a lot of the dots together, ties a lot of the loose ends together here, connects a lot of the dots here between a bunch of different things. So the Dellenger article clearly lays out that there is a pathway to bring Florida State and Clemson to the Big 12 amidst all of this chaos. You'll remember in the national media that both Florida State and Clemson are suing the ACC for the ability to get out of their grant rights deals, to pursue other options, et cetera, et cetera. It does feel like the Big Ten and SEC are staying pat. It would have to kind of be some landing spot for them theoretically out of all of that. And the presumed other option, because once they leave the ACC, they've upset the ACC, and because theoretically the Big Ten and SEC maybe don't want to redivvy up the pie or what have you, is the Big 12. The big issue to this point has been money. How would you pay them enough money to A, potentially get out of that suit, or B, or get that suit and get out of the grant rights, or B, to make it worth their while to come to the Big 12 over the ACC and cause all this chaos in the first place? Could you find some way to maybe in an uneven distribution pay them more than the Big 12 schools currently are getting or will be getting after 2025 or whatever, right? And the other big deal of all that is if you can add them to your brand's portfolio as the Big 12, then in 2030, when in January 2030, the Big 12 was doing this whole rigmarole with the TV contracts up again, then theoretically your brand is bigger, stronger, better, more valuable, and you're really looking at a true big three in the conferences game, right? If you can add brands like Florida State and Clemson. It's been a pipe dream for a while, but Dellenger connected dots based on things that Yormark said at Media Day. The biggest thing here is that Yormark was not definitive on what aspect they would use private equity for, but was firm in his discussions that it was the kind of thing they were looking into in the future of this. And to Yormark's credit, he mentioned that pro sports and pro sports franchises and pro sports leagues you've seen been involved with private equity at various points. It's kind of the way of the future. And in this model where there's such big revenue happening in college sports, big dollars being passed around, it would make sense that it's going to be the next domino to fall in that. And it would make sense that you don't want to be the last of the college conferences to do that. You'd rather be first, right? So private equity coming in adds a lot of money. We talked about it on this show before. If you missed the episode a while back, private equity would come in theoretically think the numbers pitched around like a 20% share would escalate the value of the conference triple-fold or something like that, right? And the thought would be that the private equity, they put their money in, fuel it, run it, try and maximize profits, etc. They want to get out with more profit. They want their percentage to be worth more than they put into it at the end of the private equity's contract, right? That's the whole point, is it absorbs value. Now, I've been anti that, and I would still be, in a lot of fronts, anti that. But if private equity is a pathway to adding brands to the Big 12 like Florida State and Clemson, that is a long-term profitability and viability that becomes kind of hard to ignore. Now, I still think that there are drawbacks to involving private equity in the day-to-day college sports, but if the private equity firm allows you to have enough money to help Florida State, Clemson, and whomever else get out of the grant of rights deal, if it allows you to pay them at what might be an uneven distribution, but something between what the ACC and Big Ten SEC are paying, right, somewhere in there, okay, you get somewhere in the middle there to pull them in and so on, that becomes, at least in my opinion, a chance for the rising tide to lift all boats. And that's what Dellenger is saying could happen if you're connecting what Yormark's comments on private equity were and this lingering lawsuit and board meeting happening in Florida State next week and all these different things, right? And as Dellenger said, this is eerily similar to the timing of last year when there's all this smoke around Colorado leaving the Pac-12 about this time a year ago. And then by the end of July, all four corner schools were coming to the Big 12, right? Like that all happened very much in a, similar timing of the year and kind of fashion. Now, Yormark has said that he had never thought of the conference can be too big. He wants to add big brands. He wants to go coast to coast. He's talked a lot more about the West Coast, to be fair, but you can't pass up a Florida State, right? If that's really on the table in all of this. For Houston, this is the Houston Cougars show, Locked on Coogs. I do think private equity in a vacuum sucks the value and a lot of things we like about college sports out of it. Some of the things that we would consider valuable traditions aren't financially valuable. Those might go by the wayside, right? The second and third strength coaches, you'd be doing value assessments and say, like, do we really need those, right? Et cetera, et cetera. Passing off the buck on different expenses to the customer, right? Whatever. But if the goal is to be a long-standing college football program, adding Florida State and Clemson to the Big 12 feels like it cements that, because the Big 12 very quickly becomes, assuming the ACC crumbles, because I don't think it lasts without them, Big 12 quickly becomes one of the three power conferences, and it cements itself as such for a long time. Further, from a regionality standpoint, Big 10, couple West Coast schools, north. SEC, south. Big 12, everything else, right? The Houston would be in that conference is important because that conference would feel too big to just go away. It also is a conference that'd be up for a new TV deal in 2030, which we'll talk about some over the course of the show today. But that means that you would theoretically be around for another while longer because that TV deal could be way higher with these other schools in the conference. And if it were really a conference that felt like on the same playing field as SEC and the Big Ten, right? So if the private equity thing were to happen and come through Houston or come through the Big 12 and thus Houston and not net you these other big brands, I worry the negatives outweigh the positives. However, if there is some sales pitch you're throwing me here, as Dellenger's connecting amongst these quotes, and there is a Florida State board meeting happening very soon, if this is all in an effort to make the conference a real competitive player in the top echelon of college athletics, then as much as I have my druthers, this does help Houston in the long run because it makes Houston one of the schools in a conference you cannot ignore. It just does. And college football is changing dramatically. Think about where we are today versus 24 months ago versus 48 months ago. let alone 10 years ago. Who knows where we're going to be at 2030, but you need to continue to grow and get into that top echelon as fast as possible, because otherwise you're going to get left behind. And if you're left behind, there's no guarantee you ever get back. Houston fought and clawed and fought really hard to get back the first time once they were left out of the Big 12 and when the Southwest Conference dissolved. There's no guarantee that you survive a second claw and fight back. And so I keep that in mind. I want to talk more about what else Brett Yormark had to say at Big 12 Media Days. But first, I also got to talk about winning, because this whole thing is about building a winning empire at Houston at the top of college football at some point in all of this, right? And I like winning. You love winning. We both love winning in sports, and we like winning in sports so much that we never want either to stop. But as the playoffs from the NBA and the NHL wind down, we kind of have a lull right here. We got like some Wimbledons, the WNBA, and baseball. We got Olympics coming up, football season coming up. But right now, this summer, with all the stuff that is going on, when it feels like the doldrums of summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There'll be something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel and start making most out of your summer. Check out those surging Astros and don't tell them I told you so. Trust me, check out surging Astros. FanDuel's official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. FanDuel. Get in the game today. All right. There were other things that Yormark had to say that didn't involve connecting dots. And I want to talk about how some of those things are actually also really good for Houston. And I think that as Houston is kind of moving its athletic department in the right direction, we're looking at new ADs. It sounds like there may be some decision on that in the next 10 or 12 days. Obviously, the storm slowed down some things. Summer vacation slowed down some things. Summer travel for academic purposes slowed down some things. But I do think that's happening very soon. Okay. As Houston is upping the ante in its athletic department, it's nice to be in a conference that, as Brett Yormark said, it's the best time to be in the Big 12. The Big 12 is across currently 10 states and 4 time zones during football season. You're kind of cheating with Arizona there. Arizona doesn't observe daylight savings time. So during the football season, it functions as a Pacific time zone school or pair of schools. The other half of the year, it's actually in the Mountain Time Zone because they don't change. But either way, you've got this conference that really, for the football season, where all the money is made, spans coast to coast. You can have a primetime game in any TV slot in any part of the country. And every week will matter. That parity is something that Brett Yormark harped on as being vital and important to what they're doing, right? Again, we're speaking entirely. It was football media days. We're speaking on football for the whole conference because football is what makes the money. We know that Houston and the Big 12 are also both very strong in basketball. Women's basketball had a great year last year. The calendar for the conference. Houston, we're still working on that, right? Olympic sports are Olympic sports. Houston's got a bunch of people heading to the Olympics as well. But in terms of football, well, Yormark admitted himself he was. He kind of felt like football underachieved as a conference last year. That this season you have great coaches, great facilities, great atmospheres, great stadiums, and that every week there will be games that matter, competitive games. And when I've talked about the things I think Willie Fritz is going to do really well this year, I have admittedly not tried to get my hopes up too high on year one. Do I think they can surprise the likes of OU in the non-conference? Yeah, I do. Do I think that they can be competitive and show some people up a little bit? Yes, they're going to catch some people for sure. I think that's actually what Yormark's talking about here, right? Yormark is looking at a conference that, in a true football fashion, anyone can win on any given Saturday or Friday or Thursday or whatever day we're playing, right? And I think that's important in adding an evaluation on this league that Houston's in, right? Being a conference where there is no clear, flagship program, there is no tent pole that everyone is working off of, is a good thing. It's a good thing because, frankly, in some ways, it means that we get to watch good football every week because Competitive football is fun. The ultimate thing we want is close games, right? At the end of the day, close competitive games are what we want. Quality of football on the field comes after that, actually, right? I'd rather watch a close college football game than a blowout of a pro game any day of the week, right? I think that we can agree on that. The other thing I think that works out for Houston as it's rebuilding its athletic department, recreating its football identity, and kind of restarting this whole thing for hopefully the last time. The Big 12 is wide open. It might be Utah this year. It might be Dion. It might be Arizona. It might be Kansas. But there's no dominant program the way like Oklahoma dominated this conference a lot of the 2000s, the way that Alabama dominated the SEC for what feels like a lot of my lifetime, right? Certainly the Saban years, right? The way that USC dominated the Pac-12 for a long time, then Oregon did it after them. There's Clemson in the ACC. There's none of those kinds of teams in this conference presently. So why not us? Right? Why not us? We have the best recruiting background or best recruiting things in our backyard as far as schools and players and talent goes. We're connecting with Louisiana and picking out players from there as well. We got a coach in Willie Fritz who's won everywhere he's been. We've got great support staff around him. Bell's doing a great job recruiting. Wes Fritz is doing a great job recruiting. Why not us? Parity right now means that it's wide open. And while that's fun in 2024, it also is fun potentially in what it means for 2026, 2027, when you've got the Keyshawn Hendersons of the world, when you've got these star-studded classes that we're hoping to continue to build around coming through, right? The class 2025 that Willie Fritz has put together is legitimately presently as if they had no one else in the class, present tense. The class 2025 they all signed would be the second best class to ever come to the university. And we still have over 6 months till we get them all added into the class. We can add more people for the next 6 months, right? That's a big deal. That's a good thing for Houston. The only class that was better was Ed Oliver. And honestly, if you pluck Ed Oliver out of that class and pluck whoever you'd call the top-ranked guy in this class out, right, you would actually pick the 2025 class. Ed was just that good. It elevated the 2025. Was it 2015? It elevated them a lot, right? Now, I say that to say that when Yormark says that is the best time to be in the Big 12, I feel like as Houston, he's talking directly to me. He's like, hey, you're building this program in this conference. We're going to build up the conference and the prestige of the conference. All you got to do is build yourself up to be ready to win the whole thing and dominate it in the very near future. I think Houston's doing that. And it's slow. It's not a flight switch. We saw Colorado in the Pac-12 last year, right? They thought it was a light switch. They pulled a bunch of guys in. They came in dead last in that conference, right? Even with the transfer portal, NIL, collectives, everything, building a program takes time, right? Missouri and Arkansas, Indiana have gigantic NIL programs. They're taking time, right? And so it's going to take some time. And we're going to have to get on the bandwagon and get involved with some of those things like NIL collectives and so on. We have to build those up. That's part of what's going to take the time. But ultimately, we're going to get there. And the conference is kind of set up for Houston to get there. And I left listening to that about the Big 12. I thought was very optimistic about what that meant for Houston. Now, there's a lot of other things that Yormark said that each have their ties to Houston. But on the whole, that's his message. It wasn't the only thing he had to say, though. I mean, something else he had to say, I should say, had to do with money. He's looking at this conference, Yormark is, in a way that is truly innovative business-like, best foot forward. And he's looking at every single way the conference can find ways to add dollars to that pot of money, right? The NCAA has allowed for you to put different brand logos on your field and end zones, which is great. Yormark's at the next step where he's saying, hey, can we also put them on our referee jerseys, right? Can we just put a patch on the ref jersey? Dr. Pepper, boom, call it good, right? I don't know. Is it Adidas has the stripes? Can we just get the Adidas logo on all of them? Boom, got it, right? Like something that can tie you to a little more money for all the schools, right? He also talked about how well represented the conference is all over the world, right? 70 athletes from the Big 12 going to the Olympics. The Big 12 Beyond Borders, which is a program Parker Jenkins is involved in, is doing great work, right? You look at a bunch of initiatives they have in Mexico, which are leaving the basketball part kind of in the background for a second and focus on women's soccer and baseball and stuff like that right? He looks at a bunch. He's going to create a Big 12 alumni council. One of Houston's representatives is football player Andre Ware, Heisman Trophy winner Andre Ware, right? Like that's important. We're going to get some looking back at history in the past in that way and kind of see how Houston gets represented with Andre Ware is going to be interesting as it goes, right? Pushing the brand, talking about next, what comes in next. They're getting a tune-in radio station, which is like a equivalent, I think like satellite radio, a fast TV channel, which is fast TV is kind of recreating a more consumer-based or it's closer to cable television, but still content creation kind of deal. But they're creating a fast TV channel with all kinds of original Big 12 content. They're doing these different things to kind of build up this brand because while it feels far away now because of how much has happened last 24 months, the truth is they're renegotiating a TV deal in 2030, January 2030 to be specific. And the bigger this brand can be by then, theoretically, the bigger that TV deal will be as well. He mentioned things like having different football and men's basketball media deals, and even having kind of a triumvirate of a football media deal, a basketball media deal, and a all other Olympic sports media deal, right? And having all three of those kind of pitch the highest bidder. And so if Fox paid more for basketball than football, they'd get more basketball games. And if ESPN got more football, they get more football games. And if Amazon wanted to do Olympic sports, they could get the Olympic sports and all those different things, right? I think that is another look at like how Yormark is innovative and how it's spreading out the wealth there. And frankly, I think it's also looking at some of the strengths of this conference. This conference is the best conference in men's college basketball and one of the best in women's as well. And kind of has a unique foothold in a couple different Olympic sports, track and field, those Midwest schools like Iowa State and wrestling. I mean, like there's some stuff there. And so I think that you see how all of this looks at the conference moving forward and growing and developing. And that includes the same private equity stuff we opened up with, right? Again, he looks at like pro sports are doing it. Everything else about college sports is feeling more and more like pro sports. We should just make sure we get on board with that pretty quickly, right? Instead of fighting it, let's use it and get good at it. He mentioned all this on-field technology that the NCAA is going to allow, the tablets in the coaches' boxes and the headsets that communicate with the players on the field and all those things. That's all shifting because the NCAA allows it now. And so the Big 12 got to deal with Microsoft. A little bit more money to the pot, right? And so Brady Yormark says that we're still open for business because Big 12 is. But in doing so, he opened the door, as Dellenger said, to a lot of fun possibilities, to say the least. But he also opened the door to all of these other ways in which he's bringing business in. The continuation of that, of course, is good for the conference. It's good for the geese. It's good for the gander. Rising tide lifts all boats, etc., etc., etc. Now, I'm excited about it. I hope you're excited about it. And I truthfully, I don't know, I think that it's not a crazy idea that Yormark's leadership really does make the Big 12, at least in a respect sense, on par with other top conferences. He continued to reference we're one of the three biggest conferences in college sports. He didn't say four. He didn't say Power Four. One of the three. Everything was about equal footing. And I feel like that's exactly the right mindset to have. Now, as more unfolds, if that Florida State board meeting on Monday changes, if athletic directors get hired, if more quotes and leaks of meetings come out, et cetera, we'll obviously be following it here at Locked On Cougs and talking about how it impacts the Houston Cougars, just like we tried to at the top of the show today. Locked On Cougs is primarily Locked On Podcast Network. For your second listen of the day, if you want more in Big 12 media days, Drake is doing a great job covering over Locked On Big 12, so go check them out as well. Again, Locked On Cougs, prime member of Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.